Remember, remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. I see no reason why the gunpowder treason should ever be forgot. Hello and welcome to this very special Rambling Movie Club podcast, where each week we try and watch a new movie and try and watch some good ones. This week is a special one because we're watching Vendetta on Bonfire Night. I'll be talking about how that kind of ties into the very popular British holiday. So, if you don't know, there's the movie V for Vendetta, which is based around the story of Guy Fawkes. It's a comic book adaptation that came out about, I think it was like 10, 20 years ago. Well, it's longer than 10 years ago because the movie came out in 2006. The comic book, as I said, is inspired by the legend of Guy Fawkes. Now, if you don't know, Guy Fawkes is a guy from the 1600s who tried to blow up Parliament. And then he was caught at the last minute and basically with a load of gunpowder about to blow up Parliament, and then he was tortured until he said who his conspirators were, and then they were all hung, drawn and quartered, which means they're dragged behind horses until they're almost dead, then they're hung and then they're cut up into 4 pieces and then spread to opposite ends of the country, and it was like the worst possible punishment they could have. The reason why they did this was because they were Catholic and the king was Protestant, and so it was quite a severe time because Catholics were being pursued by the government for having the wrong religion, basically. So that's kind of where this movie gets its idea from. The whole V, like being a revolutionary and like fighting against the government, and of course blowing up Parliament. Now this movie is kind of scary / interesting to watch at the moment with the whole Brexit thing, because a lot of the ideas and like the things that are talked about in this movie are kind of happening nowadays, which is very, very scary. And you'd be like, oh no, it's a movie, like nothing extreme that happens like that. But the TV presenter right at the start is saying things that are basically very similar for what was being said during the Brexit campaign for the people that wanted us to leave Europe. Now this is being recorded on the 3rd of November, so we've just had our second Brexit when we were supposed to leave pass a few days ago on Halloween. Who knows what the future's going to hold, so if you're hearing this maybe 2020 onwards, yeah, it's going to be very different for you. And the other thing as well is like they talk about the strength through unity is like all over the movie. It was always talked about like things like strength and like stronger together, or strong and stable was what Theresa May would always say. So it's crazy how these like slogans are kind of similar considering this movie came out like 13 years ago. But yeah, this movie has kind of been like a very iconic and has had a huge cultural impact. Like the mask that V wears is very iconic. It's kind of been taken over like by kind of like people who are like rebelling against the government, like who see themselves like activists and like stuff like that, especially the extreme ones. They tend to wear that mask because they see it as like a symbol of fighting against the government and fighting against oppression, no matter what kind of situation. One particular one that's kind of taken that on is Anonymous, the group of online hackers who use that mask as their symbol because, again, they believe that they're fighting for freedom. But also what's quite interesting is the not so well-meaning people. There's a lot of internet trolls who kind of see themselves as V, and that's one thing like watching this movie is like you see all of these where he's like a master of words, and like he'll give these like 2-minute like monologues where he's just like gonna convince you with like the perfect argument, and that's how a lot of like internet trolls on like Reddit and like Facebook and stuff kind of see themselves. So it's kind of funny seeing this like almost 15 years later when back then it was like, oh my god, he's so cool, like because he can like do all this, whereas now that's what like everyone kind of thinks they are, and now you're just like, ugh, not another one of these like internet trolls. The comic that this movie was based off of was written by a guy called Alan Moore, and he's done a lot of very, very big comics. Like he did Watchmen. I think he's done some Batman stuff as well. But he's done a few like big stories. And he's quite a very famous British writer. And like one thing he kind of said is like he's never a fan of his movie adaptations, and then he refuses to like help out with them. The problem is he sells the rights and then doesn't ask for any like creative control as part of it, and then just goes, oh no, I'm being no part of it. So yeah, I hate it, because that's what we do with the Watchmen movie too. But he makes a lot of money from selling the movie rights, so he can't really complain. But one thing he complained about with this movie is that he said it was being made by American companies, and it was American companies that were too afraid to tell this story in their own country, because like you see a lot of like gun violence and stuff like that in this movie, which isn't a very British thing. So you can kind of see that like kind of more American aspect, and also how it's very London centric. I haven't read the comics, so I don't know if it's the same. I know most people outside of Europe don't really know anything other than London. But speaking of being British, there's two very big British actors in this. You've got John Hurt and Stephen Fry. I kind of forgot they were in this movie when I watched it, especially Stephen Fry. This is kind of before he lost all his weight, so he's quite a big guy. But the character Stephen Fry plays, where he's like gay and like very much a supporter of like other cultures in like secret, is like very on true for who he is as a person. He's very much a very like open-minded person and encouraging and stuff like that. So yeah, it's nice to see that. And John Hurt is just John Hurt. Like, he's just a great actor. There's some very inspiring lines in this movie, like when V says government should be afraid of their people, not the other way around. That's such a powerful thought, and it's very true. And also something other like fiction writers have kind of talked about, like the author Terry Pratchett has a series of books in his Discworld series that's all about like policemen in like olden times, and in it he always talks about how like policemen only work because people believe that policemen work, whereas like if the whole people like rise up against the police force, like police don't work because there's not enough of them, like there's more people than police. So it's interesting to see like how that pops up in multiple cultural items. This movie's kind of quite dark to watch now, whereas like I remember watching it like 10 years ago and be like, oh, this is like a fun movie and like inspirational because this guy's like fighting against oppression and stuff. But yeah, with the recent political climate, it's not quite so fun to watch. I mean, if you're outside of Europe, then it's probably more enjoyable. But it's still not a bad movie, and if you haven't seen it, you should definitely watch it. You can at least see a model of Parliament blown up at the end of it, so you can't miss that. If you've seen the John Wick movies, the director of the John Wick movies is actually in this movie. So before he did the John Wick movies, he was a stuntman and like stunt coordinator. I mean, that's how he met Keanu Reeves, was in the first Matrix movie. He was Keanu Reeves' stunt double. But then in this movie, when you see the flashback of like V's like origins, and you see the facility gets burnt down, and there's like a like figure stood in the fire, that's him. His name's Chaz Stahelski. I hope I said that right. And basically he's pretty much butt naked and covered in fireproof gel, so he can stand in that fire. So this is back when they did lots of like practical effects and stuff, so it's pretty cool to see. There's not really that much to say about this movie, to be honest. Interesting to kind of see a modernisation of this history, and especially something that's a very popular like day in the UK now. Well, I say now, I mean for the last 400 years it's been a very popular day. So on the 5th of November we have a big fire that we call bonfire. So outside of the UK it's kind of known as like Guy Fawkes Day, and inside the UK we call it bonfire night because we have a bonfire. And then we also light fireworks. It's like the only other time apart from New Year's when you can quite easily get hold of fireworks. And then also, traditionally, you would make a man out of straw and put like clothes and stuff on it, and you put him on the fire as a kind of symbol of like burning Guy Fawkes, to be like, oh, that traitor. But what was interesting with bonfire night, like when you go back, it was kind of a different holiday for rich and poor people. So for rich people, it was like a celebration of being like, oh, we stopped this guy from blowing up the government. We're so lucky we caught him. Whereas for the poor people, it's very much like, oh man, he didn't blow up the government. Like maybe next year or something. It was different depending on like what aspect of life you kind of lived in. And even now we kind of see similar things almost. If you look at the news, and I imagine this year will be very big, if you look at the news for London, like November 5th protest or something, there's normally a lot of people outside Parliament and like all around London just protesting the government, just being like, we don't like what you're doing. Like, not any particular aspect, but just we don't like you as a whole. So if you've never seen like images of that before, you definitely should, because there'll be like hundreds of thousands of people there. Something kind of kept quiet because like the government doesn't want to encourage people doing it, so they're just trying to keep it quiet. Not in like a conspiracy way, but just like, yeah, they don't want it talked about too much. On a lighter note, next episode's movie is something a bit more cheerful. We're going to watch Thor Ragnarok, because I haven't seen that for ages. If you haven't seen it, it's the third movie in the Thor trilogy, and is probably the best Marvel movie there is. Well, Marvel like live action movies. I mean, Spider-Verse is still the best superhero movie ever. But yeah, it's all about Thor, and it's like a very comedy aspect take on Thor. They throw away all of basically everything that you know about Thor. They throw out the window at the start of the movie and rebuild him from the bottom up. And make him a quite funny and likeable character. Because in the other two movies, in the Avenger movies, he's kind of dry. Yeah, so we'll watch that. And so anyway, thank you for listening. On Instagram, Brenda has started doing something new. She's started making comics about our relationship and like funny moments that happen, such as when we tried to make a werewolf head for Halloween, and I actually cut some of her hair when we found this out later when she looked in the mirror and I ran away. So yeah, check those out. And she's trying to post them every week, so have a look at those. They're on Instagram. If you follow us at Rambling Movie Club, you can see those, and also see when new episodes are up, and you can always suggest new movies to us too. So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.